Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Natasha, and today I am sharing a conversation that I had with Executive Coach Dwayne Dwyer on emotional intelligence and adding value to individuals and teams. The most important thing that we do as leaders is to add value to others, and there are many ways that we can do that while being true to who we are and loyal to our organizations. Dwayne, thank you once again for joining me for a chat. And so would you please introduce yourself and tell us your style of coaching?
Awesome. Again, always great to sit down and have a conversation with you. So again, my name is Dwayne Dwyer, the owner and manager of Innovative Consultant Solutions and Services. And from our perspective, we like to look at coaching as building relationships, first of all. We, build rapport. We go alongside, and that's really the key. We go alongside with each individual client and we help them get to whatever objective they're trying to get to. So in essence, it's really kind of like just helping them think of some of the things that they, normally wouldn't think of on their own, periodically injecting a few, key thoughts, asking, have you considered this? Did you consider this? What would happen if this were to happen? And then we become accountability partners, right? Because that's really where we experience our most dynamic growth, when we actually have somebody that we know is going to ask us, hey, did you do this thing? How did that go along? And that ultimately becomes our next meeting. So, ultimately our style of coaching is just building relationships, because that's really where the most dynamic change happens in people's lives.
I so appreciate that, because I think that relationship, we tend to think of them as these like soft, fuzzy things that you're like, no, it's not like that. But every interaction, no matter how deep or how shallow it is this relationship. And I love that idea of coaching is like, you're a change partner, you're a sounding board, you're these different things to almost reflect back, like what that person's kind of going through. So they can also say like, oh, wait, that's not where I want to go, or that's not who I want to be, or like, yes, I'm right on track.
Yeah, and it's a great point. And I mentioned previously a great class that I taught today with, some of my students. And that was one of the things that we talked about, the difference between counseling, coaching, and mentorship, and helping them to understand based upon the lineage of time, right? Where each falls in, because it's very important to understand that. And I just look back, a younger Dwayne could have greatly benefited from having a coach. I just think about that, right? If I knew what coaching was, 20 years ago, I can just only imagine where I would be at in my life. So I just think that's an awesome concept.
Agreed. I was telling somebody earlier today too, I said, once I got a coach and realized the power of a coach, I can't imagine my life without one.
And it's one of the things I try to help people understand, right? It's the relationship. So you don't have to depend on me just to ask questions. Bring questions to the conversation yourself. If something that you encountered that you was at an impasse and you was like, okay, well, how would I do this? Or what if this thing was to happen? How would I respond to that? Or, and obviously, it's going to generate a conversation between me and that person, and we're going to go through the thinking process of what that looks like. Again, just referring back to the book that I'm reading, Dr. Caroline Leaf, where we are thinking, feeling, and choosing in the moment of every given situation, so that we're literally exercising the power of thought, so that we can choose the best course of action for us at that particular point in time.
Yes, and having someone that you can really air those thoughts to in a non-judgmental, open environment where they can just ask you good reflective questions, that really does help us to not be in this echo chamber that is our own brain sometimes, where you're like, no, I'm right, I'm pretty great at all the things.
Right.
or if you're negative, or if you lack confidence, I should say, in certain areas, if you're like, oh no, I'm terrible at things, to have that other person who can help us rewire our thinking.
Right, absolutely. Like you, of course, I have a coach. I believe every good coach have a coach, right? Regardless of whatever your profession is, you got one. So if you're a teacher, you probably got somebody who teach you as well. And I think that's key. I have to be able to go a place where I can actually have somebody to stimulate those thoughts that I need so that I can continue to move forward. One of the things that we talk about is how do we scale business, right? We don't want to scale business to such a degree that we can't be personal with people, but scale business to such a degree to where we can bring more people into the fold and help more people in that aspect. So I think that's just a phenomenal concept when you're looking at the helping industry, right? Because that's really what it is. The helping industry. It's not that anything is wrong with anyone, and that's one of the things that I have to say. We're not fixing anybody. That's not the case, right? But it's just the helping industry. Let me help you do what you want to do, and that's it.
And coaching, I think in the past, when it was kind of referred to as like the Wild West of coaching, where people were just like, I'll call myself a coach.
Right.
But nobody really knew what that meant. I think it was also a lot of people were referred to coaching because they had some sort of a problem, right? There was some sort of a behavior problem in the workplace. And then people were like, oh, that guy needs coaching. Yeah. But I think it's really evolved, especially over the last 10 years, where every person, especially every person who you think is going to be a leader in your organization, I don't necessarily want to say is entitled to coaching, but I do think that those people are entitled to coaching as far as you want to develop them. Like, this is a way that you also as a company can show that their value, but also to help them really build who they're going to be next.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would kind of lean in that direction. I think if you're in a position to where you are affecting the lives of people, I think you do need a coach. Even, and let's just be honest, me as a father, my coach is my father. And, that's literally how it works. When I need to talk to somebody who has more experience, who've done it for quite some time, I need a sounding board. Dad, what do you think about this? Dad, what's your thoughts of that? Yes, that would be an ideal coach for a father. So I think if you're in a position to where you're affecting lives of other people, you're making decisions that actually that have the potential to benefit or damage someone else, then you should be able to pick up the telephone and talk to an individual that is in a position to help. And that's really what it's all about. And I like the fact that you brought up, the wild, wild west of coaching, right? If a person has an issue, whatever, let's get on the phone and talk to a coach. I think over those years, what has happened is that the industry within itself made a concentrated effort to separate the lines, right? So a coach is not a clinician. That's one of the things we have to understand. A coach does not prescribe medication. A coach doesn't even get into your personal business from the past. If you're dealing with something that happened years ago in your life, that's okay. Let me refer you to the right agency so they can help. That's counseling business, right? When you talk to a coach is designed to help get you unstuck. I'm at a point in my life where I know I want to do something, right? Something is pulling at me. I just don't know what it is. And I need some help to get there. That is coaching business. Coaches help us move forward in the direction that we want to go. We don't go in the past and we don't dig up, past relationships, past hurts, things of that nature. No, we need to, call a counselor, somebody who you can sit down with and they'll talk to you about the past. And if it has, things such as anxiety, whatever the case may be, maybe they can prescribe some type of anxiety medication. That's what they do. We don't do that.
I think that delineation is also so important. Yeah. People sometimes go into it and they want something quantifiable. And it's like, I'm not here to just shove knowledge in your face or tell you hard truths that you may or may not be ready for. Right. And also I am a sounding board. I'm here to be a guide and walk alongside so I can reflect something back to you, but I'm not going to, like I said, tell you a truth that you're not ready for and completely put you down. But also, I'm not your therapist, right? I'm not. So it's to, and I think that's again when people are like, oh, what do coaches do? Go have a coaching session. Sit down with a coach, and after that, you will be changed, unless you're not ready for coaching. Which I think that there's some people just are not there yet.
Of course.
And that doesn't mean they'll never be there, but some people they will not get the benefit of it. It's kind of a waste of both people's time.
Right.
When you sit down with a coach and you really invest in your own development in that way, Life-changing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to, touch on what you just said, right? It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to experience it. In the midst of experiencing the coaching relationship, because the first session, it's really just, kind of like sampling it. But once you get a full taste of the relationship itself, it literally is life-changing. And like you said, if it's not the right time for an individual, there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. There is growth within understanding that we're not a match right now, right? So let me refer you to the right person. Let me, send you to this person, go talk to them. And then maybe at a later point in time, come back, right? Let's map out where you want to go. And then let me partner with you. Like you said, go alongside, let me partner with you so we can make sure that you get to that location. I think that's ideal, to be able to sit down with a person and they tell you from the business side of it, right? Because there's a fear that most people just want to take my money, right? There's a fear of that exists. But for someone just to be honest with you and say, hey, you know what? I understand that you felt you may have needed coaching at this particular point in time, but I don't think, based upon the conversation that we just had, I don't think that this is the proper thing for you right now. Let's revisit it maybe 6, 8, 10 months down the road and then see where you are. But until then, this is what I believe. Now, of course, it's their decision, but this is what I believe that will work best for you.
I know I've had some initial sessions with people where we kind of, as we're working through the session, it's just not working.
Yeah.
And then you ask, kind of those questions of, what is it that you are looking to get out of this?
Right.
Like, you could walk away with something. What is that thing? And then they say it. And that's kind of also what gels, where you're like, okay, either I'm not that type of coach.
Right.
It was fine. Or it's not the right time. And I believe in being very honest with people right in that first session, to be like, it's not what's beneficial for both of us. Because it is emotionally draining to be a coach, because you are working so hard at doing nothing that whole time. I'm listening, I'm letting it land, kind of thinking about ORID and how you're going to try to help them see the content and the context and all of that. But you're also, I think, as a leader, you're also like, okay, but like, here, let me solve all your problems real quick. Get a whiteboard. It can be draining on both sides. So you don't want to enter into something where it's going to feel like almost like a fight.
Yeah, and it's I love the fact that you bring up the fact that it can be emotionally draining. The most, I would say, because I had to regulate the number of coaching sessions that I do in a day, right? Because I think the most that I've done in one day was 5, and so what I do, exactly right. Like, what was I thinking? So I would do a coaching session, and then I leave the hour for notes, things of that nature. So after I do the session, I do the notes, then I had another session, then another note, another group of notes. So it was just back to back like that, right? So that probably gave me about a 20-minute break in between sessions, if I'm just completely honest. Mm-hmm. By the time I was done, I was totally exhausted. I was like, I am not doing that again.
Because there's that listening piece. And I was actually just talking about this in a group I was in the other day, where it's like, listening is harder than people think it is. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Gallup or Harvard Business Review had reported that maybe 2% of the people who identify as good listeners are actually displaying any listening skills.
Right.
So with coaches, obviously that's one of the main things you're doing. You're talking very little. I know in a 60-minute session, cumulatively, I'll probably talk for 8 minutes, maybe, and that's kind of even a lot there.
Yeah.
But the aspect of listening and getting into those deeper levels of listening, that I think is something that it's draining in a positive way.
Yeah, and let's be honest, right? To do what we do, you really have to have a passion for it. And I think, when you brought up the point about, listening, active listening is one thing. But what I try to tell people, I say it's interesting when you can come across an individual that can listen at the level of your pain, right? That is a person that is actually very in tune to what you're saying, how you're saying, and listening to the voice behind what you're saying, right? The emotion behind what you're saying. And I think that's key. So when you listen at that deep of a level, just so that you can get a good understanding, and I hear what you just say, and so I heard it, and then I ask a question just to verify that I heard exactly what I said, of what you said? Or was it something else in there? So I ask you another question that kind of gets you to expound on it just a little bit more. That's a great amount of it's positive, right? It's a lot of energy that you exert in that direction, because in some cases, especially when you start talking about moving forward, sometimes you got to kind of hold the space for the other person, allowing them the time and the necessary effort and energy to be able to go from where they are to where they want to be. You have to believe enough for them, and I think that's extremely important to do so. So yeah, listening must be at an all-time high.
There's this comfort that a coach needs to have with silence, where it's not uncomfortable. It's letting people figure it out, especially when you're asking people reflective type questions.
Yep.
But then there's this silence sometimes, and people feel the need to fill that gap.
Yeah.
Something I used to do when I first started coaching, and I didn't even realize I was doing it, but I would double barrel questions, almost to be that way nobody's uncomfortable with the silence. You have multiple options to answer. If somebody's really listening to you, if they're immediately responding as soon as you stop talking, they weren't listening to you, right? They were ready to respond, probably stopped listening a minute or more back, and have formulated this next thing.
Right. And I love the point you made about double barrel questions, because if you think about it, as educators, right, that's really how we would do. Tell me your thoughts about this. And what did you do when that happened? Yeah, it's a double barrel question. That's too much. That means that the first question that I asked was not enough, that actually got the individual to engage in that subsurface level thinking, which is really what we're after, right? We want them to be able to realize that you can't just answer with the first thing that pop in your head, because the question should be to the point. The question should be for the person, so that we cater to what it is that they really want to get after in the midst of the conversation. Because as coaches, we never lose sight of the person's goal, and that's the key. It's not my goal, it's their goal. What do they want to accomplish? And so sometimes what you'll find is that a person may say, well, I want, let's just hypothetical speaking, say I want to buy a car, which I am. Right. That's where I'm at right now, by the way. So I want to buy a car, right? And so I need you to help me to make this decision, because I want to buy this car. And I've looked at it, I've searched, and so forth and so on. Well, what is the thing that's preventing you from buying this car right now? Well, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do that. Well, I'm hearing you say you want to do this, but then you're telling me that you don't want to do that, right? So which one is more important? And so that's where coaches come in and add value to the individual, to help them to understand how you can have you can have thoughts, those thoughts that move you in the direction that you want to go, which we consider to be healthy thoughts, but then you can have contradictory, unhealthy thoughts that will talk you out of the goal that you feel you want to achieve.
Agreed. And that's so interesting too, because I was listening to something by Your World Within. There's a man who, he does these really great motivational videos. And one of the points that he made, though, was that a lot of times we spend so much time asking externally and looking at all these other things, for permission or acceptance that what we're looking at is what we want to do is the right thing, that we don't really stop and have that internal courage to just kind of take that next step. Absolutely. And I think that's something that coaches offer is, why is that important? Why is that opinion important? The answer is in you. You know the right thing. So how do you embrace that and step into it and do what you know is to be the right thing?
Absolutely. I love it. And it's another idea as well. I'm glad you brought that up. So one of the things I talk about is we can get caught up in the thought loops. So we can have a thought, and then that thought would generate an emotion, right? So we express that thought, and then that expression of that emotion generates, comes back around, and it supports the thought that we have. And so we continue in that same cycle of thinking, and that continuous cycle at times can keep us stuck. And I think one of the things that we actually do when it comes down to the value that we bring to the table is we kind of break that thought loop. Let me inject something that takes you out of that chain of thinking. And what if, one of my favorite questions, and it's taking that person and putting them into an imaginative state of achieving or having the ability to achieve everything they want at the snap of a finger. If you were a king or a queen for the day, right? If I can just snap my fingers right now and put you in charge, and you have every resource at your disposal, what would that look like? And it's just amazing just to hear some of the responses that you get. Now that you've created that in your mind, how do you get there? Right? So how do you get to that point? That one and the miracle question. I love both of those questions because it moves a person out of their own fixed way of thinking into the imaginative state. I've been known to use Walt Disney's term, Imagineering. I love that. I love that word because that's what you're doing. Once you imagine it, now you create it and you build it and you move forward in that direction.
Yes. So earlier, I'd like to touch on this. Earlier, you had said that in your class, you said that you talked to them about the difference between coaching, counseling, and mentoring. So how do you explain that to a new leader?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So these students are literally like at the beginning stages of their career. They're leaders and they're thrusted into leadership based upon having a degree and all that great stuff. So one of the things that we talk about in the class is the resources that they have at their disposal. Like they have so many resources, they just need to understand it. So when I talk about the difference between counseling, coaching, and mentorship, I help them to understand in a span of time, counseling focus on the past, coaching focuses in the moment, the here and now, and then mentors are the ones that focus on the future. Even though coaches in the here and now move you in the direction of the future, the mentor is the one that's in the far future. So counseling, we look at past performance, we gauge past performance, we talk about how we can improve it, and then go do that. Coaches, we look at what you're doing in the midst of the performance. It's kind of like the Army would call it an after action review, or AAR, right? So you do a thing, and so I would ask you, like, Natasha, you did this. What were you thinking when you did that? Kind of help me to understand your thought process. And so you will go back and consider what was going on, and then you start talking to me about it. Okay, great, that's awesome. What could have been some other alternative that you're choosing? So now I'm making you go through the thought process as a coach in the here and now. Mentors are more senior leaders, people who are closer to retirement, maybe about 6 or 7 pay grades higher, but they have established careers, they have a lot of experience, and then they request one of those individuals to be like their mentor. And one of the things I expressed to them is that once you get a mentor in front of you, once you get somebody to agree to be your mentor and you get a moment of their time, you want to come with a pen and a pad. And you want to have several questions. Like, you don't want to waste their time because they're busy. You want to make sure that you value their time, help them to understand that you appreciate every bit of information that they're giving you so that you can progress through your career, and then ask them, can we meet again? Like, you just continue to nurture that relationship. And that's the value of all three of them. All three of them, they're different responsibilities, but there's so much value added to that one individual during the course of their career, which again, they're at the beginning. So all of this is just amazing value for them.
I appreciate that perspective too, because I know that also with this, and then also what we had talked about a little bit earlier with like making these clear delineations.
Yeah, and I think they came away from it with a great deal of understanding, because I kind of expressed that, you're going to be a Natasha Cheyenne, right? You're going to be that person eventually one of these days, right? And one of the things I help them understand, like, you have to know which hat to put on and take off when dealing with your subordinates. And that's key. You have to understand, like, when you're counseling, you need to make sure that, number one, the initial counseling has happened first, right? And once that has happened, we have established the ground rules. We have that open two-way conversation, right? And that conversation involves me telling you all of the expectations of myself and the organization, right? And then from your perspective, what are some of the things I need to know about you? Is your family safe? Are everybody here? They're still in transit? Can I help you? That's one of the most powerful things that a leader can tell a subordinate. Can I help you do anything in relation to your transition right now? At the end of that class, I put them through a skit, which they love it, right? And so I break them down to 2 different groups. There's 2 people that go into one breakout room, and what I do is I go in there and I give them kind of like an overarching group. So one group, I say, you're going to have a scenario to where you have to do crisis counseling. I don't tell them what it is, you figure it out, and then you come back and brief the class. But I highlight the crisis counseling because I didn't realize they were going to pick a scenario that was actually real. Like, this actually happened to one of the young ladies. And it was a scenario to where her mother passed. But it was so genuine and so authentic that it was amazing. It brought so much insight to the class. And then in the end, one of the things she shared is that she liked the way that the person that we designated as the counselor, she liked the fact that he recommended that she go see the counselor. Would you be willing? Like, he didn't force her to go do it. He asked, would she be willing? She said she greatly appreciate that, because a lot of times what some leaders do is they force you to do something you're not comfortable with doing. And she said from that perspective, she greatly appreciated it, because when she went through it real time, it didn't necessarily happen like that. That's why we spend that amount of time trying to empower leaders, help them to understand when to take, which hat to put on at any given point in time, because you're dealing with a person's life and you can damage them just like you can build them up.
The emotional intelligence that is required of a leader and of a coach to understand like what is happening in these different moments, where you can, not just with very visible emotions, but reading the comfort level in the room, how people are feeling and responding, whether it's one person or multiple, that is like such an important part of building the relationship as a coach, but also just being a good coach.
Absolutely. I listened to you say this, right? And the first thing that comes to my mind is the empathetic leader. I think that speaks volumes. Long time ago, when I started my military career, there was zero empathy, right? It was like knife hand, go do what I tell you to do, don't ask no questions. And then, of course, I became that leader. Why? Because that was my experience. When I was younger, a young NCO, I was that knife hand, go do what I tell you to do, don't ask me the questions. But then as time progressed, I learned something different. And what I learned different was pretty much how to talk to people, not talk at them. And just being honest, at that particular point in time, I got the same thing at home. I'm not your soldier. I don't know. That's how I communicate. And that's real. That is reality. There are some people who just struggle with the art of communication. And I'll call it an art because you have to practice it over and over and over again. There's going to be some trial and errors. There's going to be some hiccups, right? You're going to, get into some of those conversations where people express those emotions that in your mind, you'll be like, oh my God, what did I just do? You have to be mature enough to pause and slow down, and then allow that person to go through the emotional cycle that they're going through. So the empathetic leader is huge, right? Being able to not, and again, I always say it, not to confuse sympathy with empathy, right? But being able to understand the emotions or the situation or where a person is. I don't necessarily have to share in them, but I can have compassion enough, for the person in the midst of it so that they feel comfortable in the space and they may even want to share it with me. That's the power of the leader. Like the leader, regardless of where you are, right? The leader has the ability to make or break a person's day. It sounds like so much power to have over a person's life, and you really hate to look at it from that perspective, but you don't know the level of resiliency that each person have. And so what you do is you automatically grandfather them into it. Say, okay, let's just automatically assume that you don't have to use your resiliency when talking to me. And I think that's key. And if we approach every situation with empathy so that we can nurture a positive environment for effective communication, which is undergirded by active listening, I honestly do believe that conversation comes full circle. You just don't get surface level conversation. You won't feel like, oh, Natasha don't like me because she don't talk to me. Well, I probably don't present an environment that is welcoming for you to talk to. So that's just some of the things we need to understand as leaders, right?
I love how you said that let's automatically assume that you don't have to use your resiliency when talking to me. If I go to work and I have a bad day and I make a snarky remark to somebody,
yeah,
I'm okay. I'll probably forget about it, but it's going to play in the back of their mind probably for the next month or until I engage them again. They're going to yell at their spouse when they get home. So there are all of these other effects. So to be very aware of that, when you're a leader, nobody should be abusing anybody, but also you have no right to abuse any person.
Absolutely.
Because when you're in that position of leadership, of authority, what you say just does weigh heavier.
Absolutely. I don't know. It's one of the practices that I make. Like even when I go out, like to a restaurant or whatever the case may be, I'm looking for a person's name tag because I'm looking to call them by their name. Because for me, it's important that even in the art of communication, I add value, even if it's only that much. it's okay. And you don't know if calling that person's name when I'm at the grocery store or whatever, if I'm addressing them by the name, like, hey, how you know my name? Well, you got it on your shirt. Oh, I didn't realize. Yeah. And so that may stick in that person's mind. They may take it through with them the rest of the day. It's the little things that people can do, especially leaders, right? The little things that you can do that goes a mile when it comes to people. And that kind of goes back to what I was sharing in class today. As leaders, it's okay to get down and understand who the people who are in your organization are. Talk to them, get to know who they are, ask them questions to where they give you a peek into their life. And once they give you that peek, understand that, well, you shouldn't take that for granted. That's an important piece of information to them. So try to remember that. Even if you have to come up to them and say, hey, Natasha, what did you say? I'm trying to remember the name of your dog. Just by doing that, right? It helps you to understand that, wait, my dog he even remembered that I have a dog. That's great. You know what I'm saying? He may not remember the name, but he's trying to remember. So he's human. That's another thing that I just exposed to you, right? So those things help people feel more comfortable in an environment. It makes them feel like it's an environment that's, family oriented, things of that nature. And that's important.
Sometimes I will struggle with people who they seem arrogant, but they're trying to tell you every time you see them, they're like, here's my resume of things that I've done, and here's and here's who loves me, and you're like, and that's great. Also, do you have kids? Do you have a spouse?
Right.
Tell me the things about you that make you. If these are your accomplishments and that makes you, let's get you a coach. No, just kidding.
I love it.
There was a long time when as I was building my emotional intelligence, I would say people would kind of present themselves that way. Mm-hmm. And I would just be like, oh, jerk, who cares? Right? Neat story. But not realizing that maybe they are kind of like a rags to riches story. Maybe this is the biggest thing that's happened in their family. I would just kind of be like, okay, thanks, Right. But now, once you kind of gain that emotional intelligence to be like, they need something from someone, and can I give them a little of what they need, even though I've only got 10 minutes?
Yeah, I think that's great. And you see, it sounds like we've crossed some of the same people. I don't know if it was the organizational thing or what, right? But it seemed as though you would have two people meet each other and they just start listing their resumes. And for me, it just sounded like, nails going down a blackboard. But then I stopped and kind of thought about it myself, and it's like, well, maybe that's their way of trying to see where their careers may have passed or paths possibly crossed. And then when they realize that, hey, we may have been here, when were you here? Well, I was here this particular year. When were you here? Oh, great. Did you know this? So then when I started looking at it from that perspective, then I realized that, yeah, they're just trying to connect the best way they know how with the thing that they have in common. And the way to get that conversation started is by laying out this laundry list of their resume, right? And that's okay, because that's where they were. It just kind of goes back to, one of the things I tend to say, it's never the situation that's the problem. It's the way that we feel about the situation. And once we consider why we feel that way, then that will help us to become aware of that thing. Once we're aware of that thing, then we can actually look at the necessary levels of thought to change the way that we feel. Because you brought up emotional intelligence, right? When I first started looking into it and studying it, it was fascinating to me because, my background didn't necessarily, talk about emotional intelligence. In fact, it was a new concept to me. And so I just got excited. I'm like, okay, so what other intelligences I can find, right? So emotional intelligence, you got this adversity intelligence. Oh, this is great. So I just started digging stuff up because I had a thirst. I needed to know. Like, this is brand new stuff to me. So I just said, okay, I'm gonna study this one. And when I started studying emotional intelligence, one of the things that made sense to me is that the first thing to talk about is being able to manage your emotions. And then the next thing to talk about is being able to manage another person's emotions. Well, cool, but not so cool, right? Most people don't want to feel like you're managing their emotions, but I understand what they were saying. Well, as I continued to study, of course, I read Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And if there's anybody who haven't read that book, that's a great starting point for emotional intelligence. But as I start to get a better understanding of emotional intelligence, I realized that the first piece of it is just simply becoming aware of your capacity. So having the capacity to become aware, right? To become aware of your emotions, which kind of gets after what I just said. The situation is what it is. I can't change the situation. If I get a letter in the mail from the IRS and I pick up the envelope and it says the IRS, I generally feel a particular type of way because the IRS just don't write me a letter and say, hey, how are you doing? Right? So the letter is what it is, right? Why do I feel that way? Well, generally because the IRS don't say, hey, how you doing? When they write you a letter, it's probably because something is wrong. And this isn't during that time, it wasn't tax season. So I literally just sat there and looked at the envelope. I didn't open it. I looked at the envelope and I said, okay, why do you feel the way you do? Okay, just said it. Got it. So how can you change that? Well, the IRS job is to make sure that everybody is doing their fair share, right? Okay, so good. So that means that they're not out to get me. No, they're not out to get me. So now I can change the way I feel about it. This is a good thing that the IRS is writing me now, as opposed to writing me later to say, hey, you owe us back taxes because you didn't pay the taxes all year. and so I only use that story because number one, it's funny. It's real, right? So it's real funny. But I use that story because it's true. This is how we move around in our space. If something were to happen, we automatically blame the situation. It's not the situation, it's the way I feel about the situation. Once I get to that point where I understand that, then I can alter that and change it. So now that gets into the controlling my emotions, which a lot of people, I wish I could just write down every time I hear, people go against the idea of controlling your emotions, because I think it's necessary. It's necessary to control my emotions so I don't use them against you. That's really what it's all about. It's very possible to use your emotions as a weapon. So we must be super careful with that. We kind of talked about previously relationships. And so that takes us into the third part, being able to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. There we go again with that word, empathetic, right? Judiciously is just simply means using wisdom, and empathetically is having the ability to be compassionate within that space. So I think when we look at that idea of emotional intelligence, it brings it all full circle and it gives us something to work at on a continuous basis.
That's perfect. I also like that assume positive intent, like type of mentality when it comes to things where it's like, yeah, why am I putting this emotion on it? Well, let's just assume positive intent. What we're putting on something is what's giving it the power and making it heavy or not. Yeah. And I was in this meditation class, and they were talking about this flow chart, and they're like, what's the problem? And then it's like, can you do something about it? Yes, then don't worry. And then no, okay, then don't worry.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer when it comes down to those emotions, because, let's be honest, we've all experienced it. You had that one person and their emotions literally drive the environment. And, just from personal experience, I had one employee and, just being honest, it wasn't her fault. Right. Well, we say that, but, as an adult, it is your fault. But she just had that personality. She was extremely bubbly and upbeat and whatever the case may be. And the environment that we worked in just did not, you're talking about workers. People came to work. And you got to realize you're dealing with a number of people from different backgrounds and things of that nature, and they just weren't used to it. And it didn't sit right with her. And I would spend a number of hours a week talking to her simply because, I was just trying to get her to understand it's okay, right? The sky isn't falling. Like, no one views you as a bad person. No one comes to work with the intention on making your day a bad day. It's okay. What you have to do, what I would suggest, is just giving them a chance, right? Give them a chance, because there was a significant age difference as well, right? Give them a chance and just get to know them. If you get to know them, what you'll find is that they didn't necessarily mean any harm. That's just, how they're wired, what they've been accustomed to doing over the past 20, 30 something years, and it worked well for them. So they continue doing that. Sometimes what we have to do is exercise a lot of patience for someone else and their emotions. And that's difficult for them, right? Because you're coming in and your emotional intelligence may be here and theirs may be here. Not saying that that's a bad thing, but they're trying to figure out why this thing that they're doing, which they've done for so many years, is not working against you. And it's like, no. What I'm saying is, yeah, I understand what you're saying. And so their voice goes up to here and you're down here. Like, yeah, I understand. I understand exactly. That must be very difficult to be able to have to deal with something of that nature. And then, you know how it works. If you do that, then generally they come back down, and then at that point we can go back to having intelligent conversation. But it's just amazing that you can sit back and literally observe this whole transaction transpire, right? And again, it's not bad thing towards them. It's just trying to help them become aware of, where they are and the thing that triggers them to go from here all the way up to here. That's not healthy, and that can be tiresome. It can be, to be honest, if it's prolonged, it could be something that causes a degree of sickness as well. Mm-hmm. So we just have to get to the point to where we manage those things. I read a great book, a real short read by Deepak Chopra. Because when you mentioned meditation, right, that's what kind of brought that back to my thoughts. And one of the things that he said in that book, he said, within the sphere of time, we have an unlimited amount of choices that we can make. And so when I stopped and I thought about it, I said, interesting. Well, if I have an unlimited amount of choices that I can make, why do I only see two? Well, when we stop and think about it, you only see two simply because those are the only two that you're aware of, and you never went back to ask yourself the necessary question, what are the options are available? It's just kind of like the IRS envelope, right? I can be upset that the envelope is here, or I can be excited the envelope is here. I can be curious the envelope is here. I can, get on the phone and call the IRS and have there's a number of different choices that I could have made. And I think we only look at it as good or bad. What he views that as called being judgmental. So when you pass judgment on a thing, it gives you permission to feel the way that you feel about the thing. So stop looking at the letter as being a bad letter. Look at it as a letter. That's all it is. Just like you said, if you can help it, then don't worry about it. If you can't help it, don't worry about it.
A friend of mine loves to catastrophize and is very good at it, very masterful catastrophizer. But I think this is one of those places where, whether it's with our friends or with people that we work with, where these like good coaching questions can really be impactful, even just in a moment, right? We don't need it's great to have a whole session, yes, but sometimes in the moment, he'll catastrophize and it always ends up with him dead somewhere. Like, it's just always very dramatic. And what's so funny about that, though, is that then when he's done, you don't want to be like, well, that was crazy, right? You always go, wow, you're really upset about this. So to even just say something like, well, that sounds serious. What's another possibility, right?
Right.
To even get somebody to think like, okay, maybe we don't all die.
Yeah.
That's a funny but real example. When people look at things and they think that there are only these options, I think also maybe they have not been exposed to leaders like you who have asked them those other questions or encouraged them to think in these other ways. So I really agree that that's where that patience piece comes in, because people like you and me, we're always reading, we're always taking in great content and figuring out how to use it to empower other people as quickly as possible and not, sitting on it. And some people, maybe they read a book every 5 years, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just where they are. And just, that patience of who I am is who I am, and who they are is who they are. So how do we ask questions to help us get to at least some sort of an even plane where nobody feels superior and nobody feels subordinate?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that takes you back to the power of coaching, right? This is the things that coaches, tend to be good at doing, being outside of those emotions that you actually have in the moment. So this is a great segue into marriage coaching, because, we look at marriage again, nothing is wrong, right? Nothing is wrong. They just reached a point and they just want to continue to move forward so that they can continue to thrive together, right? They've reached a place of complacency. They don't want to be complacent. They don't want to stay there. So, we have certain conversations. One of the things I share is that, adversity in a relationship is actually good if we really view it that way. And this is the key, because we have been conditioned to be so competitive. We're so competitive in nature that if you don't disagree with me, then I view you as the adversary. No, that's not the adversary. That's still your wife. That's still your husband. That's your best friend. So learn how to disagree and still like each other. Realize that they're not disagreeing with you simply because they want to be at odds with you. It is something within them that says, I don't necessarily like that. So be open, because this is where I help people to understand the difference between perspective and perception. So our perception is based upon everything that we know and everything that we've experienced. And so anytime new information comes to me, it's sifted through that information that I already have. And so that's the only way I can see it. To where if I want to look at it from a different perspective, it requires that I take the understanding of all of my information, set it aside for 1 second, and try to see it through your lens. If I can do that, if I can let go of my ego, I'm sorry, did I say that? If I can let go, if I can let go of my understanding for 5 seconds, and just look at it from your perspective, and then ask you questions about the way that you see it, just so I can get a better understanding, and then take that information and then compare it to what I know, then maybe we can get to the point to where we can move to a higher sense of awareness. And I think when we do that, it really helps to value the relationship, because again, in the marriage, the covenant is the key. So it helps to remove the individual. So when we get we get into discussion, one of the things I share, most disagreements happen because I want my way or you want your way, right? But if we recognize the covenant as number one and say, okay, what's good for the covenant? Then that will help us to set ourselves aside and then look at reality overall. And then we can make the best joint decision for us. So again, that's where coaches come in, right? We ask those questions to usher them into a sense of awareness that in their heightened sense of emotions, this is the guy I'm worried about.
What I really appreciate about that too is that sometimes, when couples or people who work very closely together, whether it's like the CEO and the COO or whoever, when people have to be close because of some sort of an arrangement, marriage is much more than just an arrangement, let me say that. But it's interesting because sometimes you are at odds so often that you forget that other person, like you said, that is your best friend. They do have the best interest at heart, because you've been at odds for so long that even when they start to ask questions, you're like, get defensive. Like you said, the covenant, like what is the core of that relationship? Like, why are you here? Like, why did you start this? And to be able to move forward with that.
So a marriage is like a special type of relationship, right? But from my perspective, everything is relationship. Even just in this conversation, this is a relationship, right? So even when you consider, like if you're looking at just two friends or coworkers, or even, in your family, even if we can do that, if we can honor the relationship over the individual, then that helps to remove us from it, and we don't have to fight for position. Let's value the relationship, because I value the person, I value the relationship. Because once we're done with this conversation, I still want to like you. I still want you to like me. I still want us to be friends, right? And even if we're talking about our favorite football team, and my favorite football team is not yours, and we're having a heated discussion about football, who cares? It's football. You don't have to go fisticuffs over football. You're friends. Remember that. Honor the relationship because you value the person. And when you can actually look at it from that perspective, you just look at those as being sound bites that actually happen at that moment in time. Once it's over with, cut it off, separate it, it's over. We're still friends. We still like each other.
And I think that piece right there, that's why do we hold on to these different things? And I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier. It's like what we placed on it.
In any sphere of thought, you have the ability to do three things. You can think, feel, and choose about everything that goes on. And this is how I look at it. When you look at thinking, right, you have the ability to do perspective thinking in the moment to understand why I feel the way I feel. And then when it comes down to feeling, understanding those emotions that are intertwined into that thought, and then choosing the course of action. But I look at it like this. If I take away your ability to think and you're only feeling and choosing, then all you're doing is repeating past behaviors every time. And that gets after, choosing to think. What's the ratio? 15, what is it? We live most of our day 85% subconsciously. So 85% of our day, we're not thinking at all. We're just simply, that's what we do, right? If I actively take away your ability to think, then that's what you're doing. You're living subconsciously through the lens of your past experiences. Now, I give you back your ability to think, and I take away your ability to feel. I just turned you into a robot. You have zero compassion. You have zero empathy whatsoever. This is the facts. Do what the facts say to do. And that's it. I give you back your feeling, and then I take away your ability to choose. I just place you in prison. So when you really consider those three options that we have in every given situation, we can understand how we affect ourselves by, number one, not thinking, not exercising the necessary level of emotions, right? Or understanding those emotions, or not choosing the proper course of action within any given moment. And that's what gets us stuck.
What is something that you want to promote, and how can people find you?
I'm working on the podcast. I also have a online self-paced education site as well. I am also looking at doing a number of these group conversations because I think that there's power in talk therapy. And, I just honestly believe that people need to understand that there's nothing wrong with them. The same problems they have are the same problems that I deal with, and that's okay. Right? This is how we get better. This is how we improve. This is how we continue to move forward. That's the key. Just don't stop. Keep moving forward. Of course, my website, www.dwaynedwyer.com. Instagram is innovative_consulting_services. Twitter, Dwayne Dwyer 2, DWAYNE DWYER, the number 2. And of course, I'm on Facebook. I have a number of different connections. Feel free to connect with me. I also do the emails. So I have email campaigns that I promote periodically. I love those because it's something that you can look at throughout any time of the day when they come out, and they are motivating, they're empowering, and they just help us to keep moving forward and to feel better about ourselves. And I also do posts on Facebook pretty much every day. And I try to leave messages up there that's uplifting, messages that just help people to understand that, I got it. Life can be difficult if we focus on the difficulties of life. But when we stop focusing on the difficulties of life, it is a beautiful thing. And if we learn to appreciate our similarities and respect our differences, man, the world will be so much of a better place.
In this episode, Dwayne and I touched on a lot of topics, and to explore these concepts more for your own self-development, I would invite you to journal about a few questions and a quote. The first question is, how do you use emotional intelligence on a daily basis? Are you better at emotional intelligence in your personal life or your professional life, and why? The second question is, what are 3 things that you can do this week to add value to the people around you? The quote I have for you is from Theodore Roosevelt, who said, "The best executive is the one who has sense enough to pick good men or women to do what he wants done, and self-restraint to keep from meddling with them while they do it." Thank you for listening to this episode of Equipping Leaders. All of the resources mentioned in this episode can be found on my website, NatashaCheyenne.com, as well as timestamps to help you get right to the resource that you are looking for. On the website, you can also find a weekly leadership journal entry, a resource page with challenges and downloadable content, a place to sign up for my weekly newsletter, and an upcoming leadership platform full of workshops. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha and on Twitter and Facebook at Natasha Cheyenne. If you'd like to hear more about a